Hi, and welcome to the activity 2 for Unit 1, Lesson 5. Instead of doing the density of solids, which we just did in Activity 1, we're going to talk about the density of some liquids. So, on our material list, we have a graduated cylinder, some vegetable oil, water, maple syrup, a liquid measuring cup, some paper towels, and some colored pencils or crayons. I grabbed both. I also grabbed some of these felt tip markers. I didn't know if my crayons would be sharp enough, and I don't have very many colored pencils. So um, that's something that I'm able to switch up within the lab without changing the results of the lab. Now, in order to find the density of different liquids, we're going to pour them into our graduated cylinder. So different types of liquids have different densities. Liquids with the greatest density will sink towards the bottom of our graduated cylinder. So as the density gets less, it will be at the top. Before we get started with our lab, we want to make sure that we have read through the introduction, materials, and the procedures of our entire lab. We don't want to get to number 3 and be caught off guard. So that's something that you want to remember when you're going through these labs. To read through the entire thing before you begin the lab. Number 1, gather the materials you will need. We went through those. Number 2 says measure 1/4 cup of water within the measuring cup and then pour into the graduated cylinder. So in order to get ready for number 1, 2, 3, and 4, I have all of my materials set up next to my graduated cylinder. That way I am ready. Another thing you want to make sure that you're remembering to do is to have a spot inside or within your science journal to record anything that you need. About density activity, normally I would start a new page for a new lab, but the information above my density activity number 2 is the information from our density activity number 1, density of solids. So it's okay to just keep on going down in your lab within the same page if need be, just to conserve on paper. Just something that I like to do. So make sure that you have all of those ready for you when you need them to be ready. So switch the camera and we'll begin with step number 1. Zoom out here so we can get a picture of our graduated cylinder. There we go. Now we can see our graduated cylinder. Of course, I can see the numbers a little bit better than you're going to be able to, but I'll go through and do the measurements with you. Step number 2 says measure 1/4 cup of water in the measuring cup. Pour the water into the graduated cylinder. So I have 1/4 cup of water in here. I'm going to pour that into my cylinder. Number 3 says measure 1/4 cup of vegetable oil. And then pour that into your graduated cylinder. And this is the point where you're going to want to make observations in your science journal. So what is happening between the two liquids that are now in our graduated cylinder? So what's going on down here? Let's make a couple observations together. The oil and the water have separated. It appears as though the oil is sitting on top of the water. Now we discussed that liquids with the greatest density will sink to the bottom of the graduated cylinder. So does that mean that our water is more dense than our oil? Let's add some more liquids to this graduated cylinder and see what happens. Number 4, measure 1/4 cup of maple syrup into the graduated cylinder. 1/4 cup of maple syrup. Now, I don't know what would happen if you used, if your family has regular syrup. I don't know if that would change it or not instead of maple syrup. And let's observe what's happening between these three liquids. So I can see it does look like it's separating. I don't want to jiggle it too much. It looks a little bit different out here than it does in the middle, and especially at the top. It appears as though it's still just clear at the top. I'm going to let a few minutes pass and allow these liquids to kind of settle into where they want to be and record any observations I make within my science journal. Now I have allowed my graduated cylinders to sit for a while and try to let the three different liquids settle on their own. If you get close, you can see, well, this one's easy to see. This top layer is very easy to see. The middle layer is not as well defined as I thought it should be. So I went through and I thought to myself the reasons why that happened. And I came up with a few. So I can, by looking at the graduated cylinder, I can see the different layers at which these three liquids settled. Now we added the oil and the water first. So we know how those ones separated. So that's not really a guessing game between the clear liquids. Then we also know that we added the maple syrup last. So we can see by looking at our graduated cylinder that it is darker on the bottom. So we know that the maple syrup settled at the bottom. Therefore, it has the greatest density. I went a little bit further and did the experiment again to check myself. Now that I know which three or at which point they settle, what's at the bottom, what's in the middle, and what's on the top, that's how I added them to my next one. And I like to show you this because you can see it defined a lot better. Let me get this centered here for you. Now looking at this cup, we can clearly see there is a line of maple syrup in the bottom of this cup. It's very clearly defined. We can see also a clear definition here, as it is in the other one. So we're really just looking for the definition between oil and the maple syrup. And you can see it here, very defined. So if that's something that you end up wanting to do, um, that's a great thing to feel like you are free to do. So if you end up doing an experiment and you say, okay, well, I know how it's supposed to end up, and I would like to see a more defined area after you have completed it, answered your analysis questions. So that's something that you will want to do. After you've answered those, if you want to then continue in your science journal to make a few alterations and go farther into it and just to see what substances, if you can get a clear definition by adding the substances at different times, please feel free to do that. Always remember to make the observations in your science journal and answer your analysis questions before you do the additional